Hi, I'm Josh, and I am so grateful you have chosen to spend a bit of your very valuable time with me as I talk about the games that I played in the month of October. Now, I am recording this towards the end of November. The weather's getting cold here in Canada, and because I'm an absolute wimp when it comes to the cold, I'm a heat lover all the way. My first reaction is to panic and grow out my natural facial scarf a little bit. Try to keep as warm and cozy as possible. But anyhow, the month of October was just a relatively slow month again. Although only 8 different games were played, I did acquire one new game, one of which was one of the games that I played, and it was also the month of completing campaign games. So let's get right into it. As usual, I'm going to go through these 8 games in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game. We're going to start off with a game called Corridor, which I talked a bit about last month. I played that 2-player with my son Evan last month, and this month, for the first time, I tried playing it as a 4-player game with both my sons and one of their neighborhood friends here. And it is quite a different experience as a 4-player game. As a 2-player game, Corridor is a highly tactical, very thinky, no-luck, abstract strategy game. However, you throw 4 players into here and it becomes just a huge, chaotic mess, which is fun in its own right, for sure, but not as good as the 2-player version. To show how chaotic it was, in fact, the first time we played with 4 players, I ended the game with my piece still on my home row. I had basically tried to come out, gotten blocked by fences, had to circle around and come back, and when the game was over, I had made no progress across the board. Whereas in the second game we played, I actually won the game. I was the first to get my pawn across the board. So yeah, I mean, it was really fun to try it as a 4-player game. I don't like that it adds this element of politics into trying to convince other players where to put their fences. No, don't block me, block them. Look how far they're getting, and that sort of thing. I tend not to enjoy that type of thing in games. So yeah, the 2-player version of Corridor is superior. It was still fun to try the 4-player. I rate this game 6.5 out of 10. Next is the new acquisition. This is a game called My Farm Shop, and the reason I ended up with this game was because I had taken my older son Evan to the hospital for some x-rays, and on the way back he requested to pop into the game store that we were driving past, our friendly local game store called C&C Gamebridge. And in browsing the shelves, he saw Machikoro on the shelf, and he had remembered that he enjoyed playing it back in the summer when we had a bit of an uncle and cousins getaway at a cottage, and he had expressed interest in picking it up. Now, because of my money situation, I have to be very careful about anything I'm spending money on, and so I was a little bit hesitant until I saw that they had a 50% off shelf, and I saw My Farm Shop on the shelf for only $15, and I said to him, hey, this is kind of a newer version of Machikoro. It takes that same kind of dice chucking to get stuff system and kind of makes a whole new game out of it. Now, Machikoro is a game that way back when it was first released in 2012, just over 10 years ago, I did play it quite a bit and I enjoyed it, but over time my enjoyment kind of gradually dropped off. However, with My Farm Shop, they've done some interesting things, especially with the dice-based systems. So, whereas in Machikoro, you're very much at the mercy of what number you roll determines whether or not you get resources and how much you get, as opposed to My Farm Shop here, which gives you a lot of control because you're rolling 3 dice, and of those 3 dice, you're choosing one of them to decide which card you're taking from a field of available cards to add to your own tableau, and then with the other 2 dice, the total of those 2 dice are determining which of the fields in everyone's tableau are getting activated. So if you roll 3 different numbers, there are a few different combinations of things you could do. Obviously, there's 3 different fields you could choose versus a few different ones you could activate by combining the dice in different ways. So there's a lot of choice in the game, which, if you're prone to analysis paralysis, could definitely slow players down. And added to that is the fact that you can collect these bag tokens that allow you to discard tokens to adjust any of the dice up or down. So not only do you have all these choices of how to combine your dice to get stuff and activate your tableau, but all those numbers can also be adjusted. So the decision tree is surprisingly big every single time you roll those dice. Now the good thing about that, of course, is it gives players a lot of agency and a lot of choice over how they play out, as opposed to just having to rely on the luck of the die, like in Machi Koro. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about this game is there's this balance between having cards in your tableau that allow you to activate them to gain resources, and having other cards in your tableau that when you activate them allow you to sell those resources for money, which is also victory points, just like in real life. And that's an important balance, because you don't want to have just a ton of resource gaining things and just end up with piles of resources that you can't sell, or conversely just have very few resources with a lot of great ways to sell them. So there is that balance there, and the players, like I said, do have a lot of choice about how that is all built. The other interesting thing about it is the game comes with 3 optional modules that can be added on to the base game. 2 of them are quite small modules, and the first time I played the game, I played it 2-player with Paul, and we played with those 2 smaller modules. The second time I played it, I played with my 2 sons, and we played just the basic game without any of the modules. In both instances, I won the game. I guess I somehow managed to figure out how to get a fairly efficient system going. And a little spoiler to my games played in November, I did actually get this game played again in November. 2 players with Paul using all the modules, and I ended up winning the game again. So I don't know what it is about this game that clicks with me, just like another one I'm about to talk about here in a couple minutes. But despite all that, it didn't really blow me away. It was an enjoyable game to play. Although while you are each turn faced with some potentially difficult decisions about how you manipulate the dice and which cards you're acquiring and activating, it doesn't feel super interesting to me for reasons that I can't quite put my finger on. I don't know if it's because it's almost too easy to do the good stuff you need to do every turn with the amount you can manipulate the dice. But saying that, the flip side of that, having bad options potentially come up because of dice rolls would be even worse. So I guess it's just a game that didn't particularly grab me. I did enjoy it, and I definitely play it again. What's interesting about the ratings, between myself, my 2 sons, and Paul, we cover the whole spectrum of ratings from 6.5 to 8. So I myself rate the game 6.5 out of 10. Paul rates it 7 out of 10. Wyatt, my youngest boy, rates it 7.5 out of 10. And Evan, my older son, who was at the game store and helped me pick it out, rates it 8 out of 10. Although one telling thing about it is that my boys haven't, of their own accord, requested to pull out this game again, which is usually kind of the biggest telling point on whether a game is a hit with them or not, is if they ask soon after to play the game again, which they haven't in this particular case. Next up was my 15th play of the year of chess. In this case, my older boy Evan convinced me that I needed to download chess.com on my phone. I was previously using some other free chess app. I can't remember what it was, but he said that chess.com was probably a superior app and I should download it and try it. So I did. Played my first game against the AI and won pretty handily, so I imagine it'll adjust my rating and my AI opponents accordingly. I haven't tried it again, but I also like that they have little chess puzzles you can do every day, which is one reason that I did have that previous app, was they also provided a bunch of chess puzzles, but I got to the point eventually after solving a bunch of them where they just became too hard. I couldn't figure them out, and then it wouldn't allow me to unlock more of the puzzles because I wasn't succeeding in solving the ones that were currently unlocked, so that got a bit frustrating. So I'm happy to have chess.com on my phone, and I'm sure I'll play it in future waiting rooms of doctors' offices and so forth. Speaking of digital gaming, Paul and I got back to playing Acropolis on Board Game Arena. This is a game using tiles and 3D stacking of the tiles to put your buildings in such a way that you can get points out of them. When I talked about Acropolis last month, I talked about just how, for whatever reason, this game was another one that clicked with me, and I just kind of smoked Paul in those first couple games we played. This month, I still won, but only by 2 victory points, so we had a very close game this month. Continued to enjoy playing with it. I still think it would be way better to play this game in person on the tabletop than try to manipulate this 3D space on the computer, but it works well enough and it's enjoyable to play. I don't think I love the game enough that I would actually seek out a physical copy of it though. I rate it 7.5 out of 10, and Paul also rates it 7.5 out of 10. Before I talk about the 4 best games of the month, let me send out a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially to my higher tier supporters, Charles M, Abe O, Saver Girl, Mojo Dam, Joanna N, and my highest supporter of all, Osmondus Perfect. Without your support, I wouldn't have been even able to consider picking up my farm shop for Evan after his little hospital appointment there, so it means the world to me that I have people like you out there who are looking after me. Thanks so much. Interestingly, the next game on this list is another little abstract strategy game that I played 4 players, and this is Armadora. This is one that I've had for years that I haven't gotten to the table in quite a while, so I was really excited to get it out again. And this one I played 4 players with myself, with Evan, and with 2 of his neighborhood friends here. This is a pocket-sized, fairly tactical, abstract strategy game with a tiny bit of bluffing, but with no luck beyond kind of how the initial board is set up with the gold, how it's spread around the board. Once the setup is completed, though, it all comes down to the play of how it plays out. Now, in the same way that Corridor allows you to either move your character on a turn or place a fence, Armadora more or less allows you to place a character on the board or place a fence. Whereas with Corridor, you're racing to try to get across the board. In Armadora, you are basically trying to enclose territories with your own warriors having the highest number of power on your warriors for each enclosed territory in order to gain the gold that you end up surrounding with your fences. So you have a limit to the size of the territory, like it can't be any smaller than a 4 square territory, but at the beginning of the game the entire board is open and it only becomes enclosed as players build fences and place their warriors and try to surround those warriors with the gold piles. And the sort of hidden and bluffing element comes from the fact that your warriors are placed face down and their values on them range from 1 to 5, I believe, with 1s and 2s being the most common, and the higher numbers only have a couple warriors of each of those. So you don't really know, even if a player only has 1 or 2 warriors in an enclosed section, maybe they are the bigger power warriors, and when it gets revealed at the end of the game, you might end up getting surprised and getting some gold taken that you thought was going to be yours. But the other really fun thing about the game is that each of the 4 potential players in the game has an asymmetrical special ability. So the wizards, I think it is, allow you to twice per game look at one of your opponent's face down warriors so you can see what exactly their strength value is. Another character, once or twice per game, you can place 2 warriors instead of 1. Another one allows you to place 2 fences instead of 1. And then the elves, you can shoot arrows at your opponents. You can put an arrow token on top of one of their face down warriors to decrease whatever that number is by 1 when it's revealed. And you have a couple of arrows you can use during the game. So that slight little bit of asymmetry also adds to the interest of the game. I think it's a really clever game. It's super fun, and I found it works quite well with anything from 2 to 4 players. I rate the game 7.5 out of 10, and the fact that it comes in such a small package means you can also just throw it in a pocket and take it down to a pub or cafe and play it on the go as well, which is pretty cool. Now we get to the first completed campaign, and so I've been talking a lot about My City, the Reiner Knizia Legacy style game with polyomino tiles, and we actually played our 24th and final game of My City. If you've watched my previous month's videos, you'll know that one complaint I had about the game is the fact that I, from the first few games, got so far behind in the overall campaign points that it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that I had no real shot at winning the campaign. And although I did end up winning 2 of the final 3 games of that final chapter of the campaign, that is kind of how it worked out. Paul won the campaign. What's interesting is to look at it in the first half versus second half, because in the first half of the campaign, Paul had 20 points to my 8 points after the first 12 games in the campaign. But in the second half, Paul got 30 points and I got 32, which means that I managed to just edge him out just looking at the second half, but overall our scores ended up being 50 points for Paul and 40 for me. Not super close by any means, but at least I can feel good about the fact that whatever built-in catch-up mechanisms came into play in the first half of the game did help me out to at least make an even game for the second half, even if it was kind of too late by then. Now, I wondered if my initial score of 8 out of 10 was going to change by the end of the campaign, because legacy campaigns in particular have so many changes that tend to happen throughout the game. Often they kind of get better and work towards a climax. However, I think that having played right through to the end, I'm going to keep my rating at 8 out of 10. Paul also has a rating of 8 out of 10 on this game, and while I found that each individual chapter, consisting of 3 games, did add some fun new elements to the game, overall it didn't change in any sort of drastic ways by any means. I think whatever interest was gained by the new elements was kind of lost by the fact that I was kind of out of the campaign from a fairly early stage. Overall, though, obviously 8 out of 10 is still a great score, and Paul was already talking about going back to the beginning and replaying it. Since it's a 4-player game, we still have the components for the other 2 players that we haven't used, which means that we could do the entire thing again in the future as a 2-player game. And I could probably see that happening at some point down the road once I've had a nice long break from it so that I don't get too burned out on it. So going back a month or two, I was really excited to get back to the game Railways of the World when Paul and I played the Railways of Mexico standalone expansion. And this time, in the month of October, we played Railways of Europe, which is, I think, the first expansion that ever came out for Railroad Tycoon, as it was called then. And it's the first expansion that I had got. It's one that me and my ex-wife had played quite a lot because it was an earlier expansion with a smaller map, which meant it was more suitable to be played as a 2-player game. When we took it out and put it on the table, the map was bigger than I had expected. I thought, oh, is this actually going to work well as a 2-player game? But then when you look at the way in which the cities are laid out on the map, it really encourages players to start right in kind of the north central part of the map and spread out from there. So Paul was the first player and he chose that kind of north central location, and so I was thinking, okay, I don't want to be bumping into him right off the bat, so I was racking my brain, looking all over the map, thinking, where else can I start where I can just kind of go off and do my own thing? Ultimately, it just made no real sense to start anywhere than right beside him. So right from the get-go, we were kind of running into each other, competing for adjacent cities, and so even as a 2-player experience, it ended up being a fairly highly interactive game. I managed to pull off the win this time, even though Paul had beat me in Mexico, and I rate the game 8.5 out of 10. It's a wonderful game. Paul rates it 9 out of 10, so he agrees with me on that point. And then the final game of the month is the other base game campaign that we completed, and that is our Battles of Westeros campaign. We finished the 10th and final game of the base game campaign. The final scenario had each of us start with a huge army on the board. It was a complete bloodbath, but I still ended up getting crushed, as has been the theme with this particular campaign as well. I started the game with 59 figures, little soldiers, on the map, and at the end of the game I had only 8 little soldiers left alive, so my army got almost completely wiped out. So in terms of our final campaign stats, Paul, playing as the Stark faction, won the first game. He won games 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10. So he won 7 of the 10 games, whereas myself, playing as Lannister, won games 2, 8, and 9 for 3 total wins. Again, another campaign where I got pretty much smashed pretty thoroughly. However, I am super excited to next go on to play the expansion content, because I do have all of the expansion content that is available for Battles of Westeros. I picked it up really cheap after that the system was essentially dumped by Fantasy Flight Games. And although in the past I had started the campaign, I think on 2 other occasions, I had never completed the entire base game campaign, nor have I ever played any of the expansion content. So I'm very, very excited to bring in some new leaders and new units and see how that mixes things up. I rate this game 9 out of 10. It's definitely one of my favorites. Paul rates it 8 out of 10. And I hope you're not too sick of hearing about this game, because we are going to take a little break from it so that we don't burn ourselves out on it. But I really hope that we are going to get back to it in the fairly near future. That was my month of October. What about you? Please get into the comments. Let me know what games you've been playing. What have you been really enjoying lately? Are there any titles that you have your eye on that you're hoping that you might end up with over the holidays? I'm genuinely interested in hearing all about it, so please do let me know. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumb up. If you didn't like it, give me a thumb down and let me know why you didn't like it. I'm just grateful to you for spending this time with me today. Cheers. It's hard to know when you're playing better than other, well, a future tactical game with a and although I did win 2 of the final 3 games, that did end up, overall though, obviously 8 out of 10. And I hope you're not too sick about hearing about this. Please get into the comments, let me know what games you've been playing. I'm just grateful that you're here and that you had. We're just grateful to you for spending this time